I do not own the rights to this music.
Take me to the water, take me to the water, take me to the water to be baptized. Ooh, wash me, Lord, in your mercy. Cleanse my soul and make me new inside. Take me to the water, take me to the water, take me to the water to be baptized. I've been walking in the valley, Lord. My heart heavy, my spirit warm. But your river, Lord, it keeps on calling me. Come as you are, be reborn. Take me to the water, take me to the water, take me to the water, take me to the water to be baptized.
Hello, and welcome to Sunday School Summary with Brother Ron. Sunday School lesson for Sunday, November the 30th, 2025. Our reference material for the Sunday School Summary is based upon the International Sunday School Lesson Series as published by the Sunday School Publishing Board. We are discussing how God directed and guided the people of Israel through the prophets, and the lesson series covers the prophecy of the prophets Isaiah, Jeremiah, and the prophet Ezekiel, which we are studying in today's lesson. The title of our 13th and final lesson comes from Unit 3 of the Fall 2025 lesson series, and it's titled Hope Floats, or Hope Floats on the Healing Waters of God. The key verse comes from Ezekiel chapter 47, verse 12, and it reads, "All kinds of fruits will live on each side of the river. Their leaves will never become dry, and they will always give fruit every month. And this is because the water that feeds them comes from the holy temple. The fruit from these trees will provide food, and their leaves will make sick people well." Now, the title of today's lesson, Hope Floats, comes from the Old Testament book of Ezekiel. And the book of Ezekiel follows the same narrative of the history of Israel as the prophet Jeremiah, as they prophesied during the same time of Israel's turbulent history after the glorious reign of King David, leading up to Jerusalem, to the fall of Jerusalem and the exile. And during this period, Israel experienced periods of spiritual decline in devotion to God, followed by revivals of the covenant relationship. In response to these conditions, God called the prophet Jeremiah to prophesy and warn Israel of God's impending divine judgment in response to the idolatry, social injustices, and moral decay. Jeremiah's prophecy of repentance and submission to Babylon as God's chosen instruments of God's divine judgment was rejected, leading to the fall of Judah, Jerusalem, and the temple in 586 BC. Now, Ezekiel was already in exile in Babylon, and God called Ezekiel to prophesy to the defeated and dispirited Israelite people who were in exile in Babylon, which brings us to today's lesson. There are three summary lesson points for today. The source of living waters, and that's from Ezekiel chapter 47, verses 1 and 2. And the deepening journey, and that's from Ezekiel chapter 47, verses 3 through 6. And 3, the promise of restoration, and that's from Ezekiel chapter 47, verses 7 through 9, and verse 12. The passages for the lesson today revolve around the key words of faith, wisdom, and that's it. Now, we know that faith is a complete trust, assurance, belief, or confidence in God. It is the faith to rely totally on God when the river is too high to cross on our own in today's lesson. Wisdom is the ability to apply experience, knowledge, and understanding to produce good judgment. It is the wisdom to understand, to be patient, and trust God's plan, and acknowledge that faith is a continuous spiritual progression in today's lesson. The source of living waters is our first summary point, and that's from Ezekiel chapter 47, verses 1 and 2. And these passages describes Ezekiel's vision of the righteous and transformative power of God's healing water flowing from the temple. And he goes on to say that the man brought him back to the entrance of the temple, and he saw water that was pouring from under the entrance, and it was pouring towards the east, and the front entrance of the temple opened toward the east. And he says that the river of water came from under the south side of the temple, and it went past the south side of the altar. So that implies that it is righteous when it is flowing to the right. The man took out him through the north gate, he says, of the temple, and he went around to the outside of the gate that opens towards the east, and he saw a small stream of water that was coming from the south side of the gate. And again, it appears that this is implying that the water is righteous, flowing from the right side of the temple. Our second summary point is the deepening journey, and that's from Ezekiel chapter 47, verses 3 through 6. And these passages of Ezekiel's vision demonstrates the level of spiritual growth in faith. And the first point, he says that the man went towards the east, and he measured 500 meters in that direction, and he took him through the water. And he says the water was as high as his ankles. He says he then measured another 500 feet in the stream, and he said the water was as high as his knees, and he measured another 500 meters, and the water was now waist high, and then he measured another 500 meters, and he says here the water opened towards, another 500 meters, and he took me through the water, and it became deep as a river. And he says it was too deep for him to go across, and no one could walk through it. And he says that they would need to swim, or we could only rely on our faith in God, because in the other situations we could wade through it. But it becomes impossible at certain points, and our reliance is totally on God. The third and final summary point is the promise of restoration, and that's from Ezekiel chapter 47, verses 7 and 9, and verse 12. And he says, in these passages we saw Ezekiel's vision shows God transforming salty water to pure water, or is changing our lives from one of sin to one of purity. And it is based upon this healing waters. And he says, when I got there, I saw very many trees, and they were on each side of the river. And he said the river grows toward the land in the east, and it goes into the valley. And he says, then the water goes into the salt sea. And when it goes into the salt sea, the water becomes pure instead of salty. So that is the transformative power of God at work. And he goes on to say that this transformative power changes that river from one of desolation to one of thriving. And he says when the river goes, many kinds of fish will live, and there will be lots of fish in the salt sea, because the water that goes in there will make it pure, and they will be living things in places where the river goes. And he goes on to say that all kinds of fruit trees will live on each side of the river, and their leaves will never become dry, and they will always give fruit every month. It says this is because the water that feeds them comes from the holy temple. So the water that's flowing from the holy temple has the ability to transform lives from one of desolation to fruitful multiplication, as reflected in the teeming, life-giving river. It says that the fruit from these trees will provide food, and their leaves will make sick people well. So this is Brother Ron with the Sunday School Summary for Sunday, November the 30th, 2025. Thank you for watching. Have a blessed week, and we hope to see you next Sunday for another edition of Sunday School Summary with Brother Ron.